for an explosive edition of Equinox.
It's not like handling snakes. If I, well, actually, yes, come to think of it, I eat my words. It is like handling snakes. If I, through absent-mindedness or lack of knowledge or sheer carelessness, do the wrong thing, many of the operations that I perform will simply blow me apart. Mind you, if you blow yourself up properly, I think it's a good way to go. Think of the hospital bills you save.
Sidney Alford loves explosions. When he's not making secret gadgets for the military, he applies his explosive genius to more mundane matters.
It was an absolutely beautiful garden, except for the swimming pool. So we decided that we would have to get rid of it.
The blokes came with the hammers and they smashed it up a bit, but they didn't do very much because it was too strong, yeah.
And we tried a company called Dam and Blast who gave us their opinion but said they couldn't do it.
So they blow out everyone's windows if they blew it up with them.
Yes.
So we couldn't use them, could we?
And so finally, in our exasperation, I looked in the yellow pages and found Sidney Alford.
Firing! 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
A glorious act of chemical anger, witnessed not from a trench or a foxhole, but from the safety of a garden. We'd all felt that wave of energy bounce off our chests. And yes, we'd enjoyed it. We'd glimpsed that dark force, that destroyer of worlds that so many had tried to tame in the past. And we were lured by its spell. Explosive symptoms often begin in adolescence.
Oh, hello. The experiments are very nearly ready. Ready? Yeah. 3, 2, 1. We have ignition.
Peter Gurney liked to play with rockets as a boy.
It moved.
His ambition was to make a farmer's bike fly.
That certainly brings back memories of the early stages. When the thing fired, the noise was quite appalling. There was a tremendous great roar, and looked up and saw a sort of dot disappearing into the sky, which impacted into the ground about 200 metres away, was shedding bits of bicycle all over the place.
And how old were you when you did this prank?
About 14, I think.
Three generations of the Loiseau family have dynamite in their blood.
Aren't all little boys attracted to explosives and whatnot?
I think that's natural, but I know a little girl that was too, so it's not just boys.
My father said, this is mine, and this one's yours. Gave me a crew of laborers and sent me on my way with the diagram and checked on me quite a bit, but really gave me pretty much free rein there. And fell in love.
How old were you then?
15 years old.
When Ron Lancaster was a boy, he became obsessed with fireworks.
Whilst all the other friends that I have obviously lost their interest, I didn't. The only explanation I can give you of that is that once you've smelt black powder, it's with you for the rest of your life. In other words, there's a suggestion that for some people, it's sort of in the blood, and that's certainly, without any doubt, the case with me. So you can see, now it only burns 2.5 seconds, 1 inch of powder, because it's very fast burning. The fireworks obviously have force. I mean, you're releasing a tremendous amount of energy. As the reaction proceeds, the subatomic particles that are involved are getting more and more excited in order to produce the effects that you are producing. And whether there is some kind of connection between the various electrons getting excited and people getting excited at the same time, I don't know. But certainly the two things go together, there's no doubt about it.
In an unlikely trinity, the Reverend Lancaster used to combine God, fire and brimstone, until he stopped teaching chemistry to concentrate on his first love, fireworks. Ron's son Mark also has the bug. After a short spell in the Gurkhas blowing things up, he came back to help father with the fireworks. They're now preparing for the biggest fireworks display this century.
One of the main kinds of fireworks we will be using at VJ Day are star shells. Star shells, which this is just a baby one, are a kind of firework which actually get fired out of these mortar tubes. So you'd place a star shell inside the mortar tube. And then the gunpowder lifting charge forces this out of the tube, and the larger ones go up to the heights of about 1,000 feet and then explode. Here we have some of the larger shells that we will actually be using on the Thames. This is an 8-inch shell.
This is one of your specials, is it?
Yes, yes, those are very much my department, yes. Still, and Mark Lancaster makes them as well.
I'm not sure if it's symbolic, but I've made the 6-inch one and he's made an even bigger one, the 8-inch one. Perhaps when I get older I'll be able to make those as well, but not yet. To launch it, you actually put it inside this 8-inch mortar and lower it all the way down to the bottom. And that means that this mortar will fire the shell up to about 1,000 feet, and then it explodes, does at least 3 interesting things before going out, and has a spread of about 300 feet. So it's a pretty serious firework. It's really like nothing else on Earth. You have to remember that you're standing on a very small, hollow steel barge with about 4 tons of explosive surrounding you with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And once it starts going off, the whole barge can move up to 6 inches down in the water. The sound is unbelievable. It's wonderful. You really feel as if you have entertained and earned your keep for the day.
As explosions engulf the London sky, we celebrate the end of a conflict that saw an escalation of explosive power culminating with the atom bomb. Indeed, the tarnished history of explosives has been dominated by dangerous experiments that many perpetrators vainly hoped would never be repeated. The first explosive mixtures were discovered by accident. In their search for the elixir of life, 9th century Chinese alchemists discovered violent combustion. An ancient Chinese manuscript describes a dangerous concoction that burned down an alchemist's hut. This was a forbidden recipe that only the foolhardy would attempt. Mix saltpeter with honey, add freshly ground sulfur, simmer gently, and stand back lest your beard be singed. Unwittingly, they were producing the earliest form of gunpowder. Christopher Cullen, an ancient Chinese history scholar, wanted to try the forbidden experiment with real ingredients.
You're the experienced pyrotechnicist, so I think we'll trust to your judgment of the proportions.
I would say a little more sulphur.
All right, let's try
Shall we
that more.
sprinkle it straight through?
Sidney Alford was sceptical of success. He thought water in the honey might dampen any pyrotechnic prospects. But everyone else was standing well back, fire extinguishers at the ready.
Could I just ask Dr. Cullen, what the evidence is that the Chinese invented gunpowder?
Well, for a start, a little before the time of the Battle of Hastings, there's a book called The Essentials of the Military Classics that tells you exactly how to make it, how to make the fire chemical in detail. We've also got texts from earlier on talking about all kinds of mixtures that go off whoosh, including this one that we're trying here, which a 9th century text actually gives in a list of dangerous procedures that no one should ever attempt. How's it going? Any bubbles?
I think I will prefer a longer mixing stick fairly soon.
Right, well, here we are.
Being prudent, our intrepid alchemists had retired to brew a test batch.
Yes, bubbles
Quite decidedly are.
Yes, that looks local.
This is looking... Chemistry is just beginning to happen now, yeah? It's going dark a bit.
Otherwise there'll be an outbreak of chemistry, and so far it's just been physics, you know, warming things up and mixing them. And,
Excuse me, this is, these fumes are not water alone. Look, it's not dispersing,
No, I can see the yellow there.
Something's happening now.
Oh, something is going to happen now. And there it is.
Very good.
Alchemists playing in the woods. Some things never change.
I like that. Note the red
Sorry about that.
temperature.
Sorry about your football. So, I told you it would work, didn't I?
Oh, well done. We never doubted it.
They never believed
Look, the greenish, see the salt.
The whole aim of all this that's going on here is to find a way to make the human body as perfect and as long-lasting as the universe, to achieve physical immortality. So really it's the beginnings, ultimately, of the entire pharmacological industry, the same basic aim.
This is what you're trying to achieve, Sidney, when you make gunpowder?
Well, I tend to try to make things explode rather than achieve immortality, possibly even limit the mortality of other people.
Yes, that's the awful paradox. Here they were trying to find a way how to make everybody live forever, and the result is something that kills people. Sad, isn't it?
From these wildfire adventures, the Chinese developed the world's first incendiary weapons, more like flying Roman candles than mortar bombs. It would be several centuries before the full explosive power of gunpowder was realized. The man who lit the fuse of European warfare was an inquisitive English friar who began to investigate the magical properties of gunpowder.
When the flame of powder toucheth the soul of man, it burneth exceeding deep.
In the secrecy of his cell, Roger Bacon experimented with basic recipes brought back by medieval travellers from the East. Making gunpowder burn was easy. Making it explode more difficult. It was his alchemist's knowledge of the properties of saltpeter that enabled him to start making the mixture more explosive.
If you throw saltpeter on the fire, it's very obvious that something special happens. It causes the fire to burn very fiercely locally, generate sparks, and the greater the extent to which saltpeter is purified, the more violent this reaction. Saltpeter is very often the white stuff that you can scrape very fine crystals from the walls of cellars. It's also the stuff that can that oozes out of piles of soil and earth contaminated with vegetable rubbish. Saltpeter can be really filthy brown stuff, and by the process of recrystallization, and chemists owe a lot to him for having developed the process of crystallization and recrystallization from a solvent, water, he was able to produce a white, very consistent solid, which in mixture with the others gave a consistent powder.
Many of the things Roger Bacon tried in 1242, Sidney Alford repeated as a schoolboy in 1942. Saltpeter is potassium nitrate, an oxidizing agent which provides extra oxygen for fast combustion. By increasing the ratio of saltpeter to charcoal and confining the powder in a paper tube, Bacon made his first bang. Roger Bacon was a scholar who laid the foundations for modern science. He always wrote up his experiments, but his black powder investigations frightened him. He foresaw the dangers if this formulation fell into the wrong hands, and decided to encode the recipe in an anagram in the Latin text. The passage ends with the words, "And so thou wilt call up thunder and destruction if thou know the art." Nothing so dangerous could remain secret. He knew that the more the powder was confined, the bigger the explosion.
Gunpowder has two very different ways of burning according to the degree of confinement. Now, this gunpowder is essentially similar to that known to the ancients, except that the proportion of the components is better adjusted in this case. It's better made, and it will burn correspondingly fast.
On ignition, this oxygen-rich mixture unleashes a rapid expansion of hot gases. If trapped inside a container, they will cause an explosion.
Now we should take exactly the same quantity of gunpowder, but this time confined in a cardboard tube. The effect will be rather different, and I think it would be a good idea to do this outside. This enhanced confinement will increase the speed of burning, so quite a high pressure can develop and should give more oomph, to use the technical expression. Firing! 4, 3, 2, 1.
Enough oomph to blast the helmet 50 feet into the air, and enough oomph to change the course of European history.
Think of what is shown by the fact that in 1449 the King of France did a tour of Normandy and, using his siege train, knocked down castles held by the English at the rate of 5 a month. It was the death knell of the old feudal system based on the stone castle, the mounted knight and so on, and the whole social system that went with that. And what it meant was that the people who could dispose of the power to produce gunpowder weapons were the ones who could control society.
Today, the targets are not castles, but corporate headquarters. The enemy, not soldiers, but innocent victims. And the knights need no armor. They are invisible. They came to the World Trade Center in New York and the Baltic Exchange in London. Not far from where they tested the atom bomb, they are testing a more insidious device, the terrorist truck bomb, with 40 bags of fertilizer and fuel oil. Instead of potassium nitrate, ammonium nitrate. Instead of charcoal, fuel oil. Slowed down 200 times, it's possible to see the supersonic shock wave ripple across the sand and pass across the New Mexico skyline. This initial shock wave is what shatters everything. When the shock wave hits the camera mirror, it tilts up into the sky. The air blast which follows as the hot gases expand spreads debris for half a mile. Finally, half a second after ignition, a rock shatters the mirror. Roger Bacon had felt the terror of gunpowder. The advent of high explosives would unleash an even mightier force. High explosives explode in a different and more dangerous way. Some are so unstable they must be approached on tiptoe.
I'd like to demonstrate an explosive that I haven't made and demonstrated for over 20 years now. Familiar to most schoolboys, it's called nitrogen triiodide. Now this is an explosive composed of nitrogen and iodine in a very unhappy relationship. You might describe it as being a very unhappy marriage. These elements are just waiting for an excuse to suddenly burst apart. It's so sensitive that even a fly landing on it might set it off. So if you kindly put on your ear protection and your eye protection, I'll now demonstrate.
Nitrogen triiodide is so wild, it would be hard for anyone to harness its explosive power. The first practical high explosives were discovered by accident when 19th century chemists began adding nitric acid to organic compounds to make new medicines. In 1846, the Italian scientist Ascanio Sobrero tried adding glycerin to nitric and sulfuric acid. By nitrating the glycerin, he had created a new oxygen-rich compound called nitroglycerin. This was a dangerous liquid whose rapid chemical breakdown could be triggered by heat or shock. Many chemists have been mauled by this beast. Bob Torrey has had a few close shaves himself. It held an irresistible fascination.
The power of nitroglycerine far surpassed other explosive materials. Yes, I suppose it did have a certain attraction, but being a liquid material, it wasn't very easily handled and it wasn't very safely handled.
Nitroglycerin has a mean reputation. One drop of its explosive power can be unleashed by a hammer blow.
Now, nitroglycerin and quite a lot of other explosives decompose in a very different way from gunpowder. Gunpowder essentially burns. People in the trade use a fancy Latin word for it, deflagration, but it means no more than burns. In the case of nitroglycerin, however, the mechanism is very different. Not only does that material contain much more chemical energy for a given mass, but also it decomposes very much more quickly, and this makes the explosion much more violent. This type of very violent explosion is called a detonation.
Although low explosives like gunpowder burn quickly, high explosives go off 1,000 times faster. To capture a moment of detonation on film requires a camera that can run at 1,000,000 frames per second.
Historically, the term high explosive refers to an explosive which is actually detonating, whereas the term a low explosive refers to something that's merely burning very fast. And that can be very fast. That could be burning at speeds of maybe 1,000 meters per second, but it's still just a fast burn. It isn't actually detonating. The process of detonation is a very specific and different phenomenon. In a detonation, you have a supersonic shockwave traveling through the explosive, and the shockwave itself triggers the reaction immediately behind it. So the decomposition is not caused by the conduction of heat forwards, it's caused directly by the passage of this shockwave. So a detonation is a shockwave supported by chemical reaction just behind it, and it occurs at a supersonic speed in the material.
The father of high explosives was Alfred Nobel, a Swedish industrialist. In the 1850s, gunpowder was the only available explosive. So the commercial potential for something more powerful, like nitroglycerine, was clear. But perhaps its tendency to explode without warning made it too dangerous to handle.
Danger has never been a deterrent among scientists that are obsessed by following an object to its end. On the contrary, it can provide a powerful stimulant for them to tame a dangerous substance or instrument. If you look at the work with the atom bomb and so on, you find the same. Madame Curie in radium and so on. They knew it was very, very dangerous, but they still kept at it.
Alfred realized that unless nitroglycerin could be detonated reliably, it had no future. He experimented with the idea of using a small gunpowder charge to act as a detonator. These prototypes were like giant bangers with a long fuse. It was a significant breakthrough. Without the invention of the detonator, handling high explosives would have remained a perilous act. Although nitroglycerine was now much safer to set off, it remained a hazardous substance to manufacture. Alfred Nobel and his family began producing nitroglycerine by the bucketful. He was tempting fate. In 1864, a violent explosion destroyed the laboratory, killing his younger brother Emile. Alfred was devastated, but refused to halt work on the evil oil.
One might guess that he was in fact trying to conquer the enemy that had killed his younger brother's life and to render this beast harmless. And of course, his personality being what it was, he went on regardless of criticism or objection from his family and so on, because a true scientist often has a maniacal side to him.
In the next 10 years, he built dozens of nitroglycerin factories. Few survive today, most have blown up. This one in Norway is a working museum. Inside the reaction vessel, cooling coils kept the chemistry under control. But if the temperature rose by even a few degrees, it was time to run.
All around the nitroglycerin plant you will see barriers built. Built barriers to protect against fragments, because
Sometimes they had explosions, and of course these explosions would then cause a lot of wooden pieces being thrown for hundreds of yards through the air.
To help avoid accidents, open pipes and gravity controlled the flow of nitroglycerin. Pumping was out of the question. Friction between moving metal parts would be fatal.
The abbreviation of nitroglycerin is NGL. That's why this strange device here is called angel boogie. There are no moving metal parts. You see a rubber seal here, rubber pipe, a wooden clamp, and the nitroglycerin was then transported to the next production house.
Raw nitroglycerin does not like being moved. In the 1860s, it was killing so many people that it was giving Nobel a bad name. Nitroglycerin was banned in Britain. He had to find a way of quenching the oil and tried absorbing it on inert powders. One of the most successful was a porous white earth called kieselguhr, which could absorb 4 times its own weight of nitroglycerin. This was Nobel's most famous invention, dynamite. It was used for rock blasting everywhere and made him one of the richest men in the world. Even though Nobel's business empire was huge, he never stopped experimenting. One night, he was woken by a sore cut on his finger. He dressed it with a protective film of nitrated cotton, a preparation called new skin. This gave him the idea of mixing a similar solution with nitroglycerin. The result was blasting gelatin, which retained the power of nitroglycerin and was safer than dynamite. It is still used today.
The explosive we're using here in the concrete cantilevers is Gelamax, which is a nitroglycerin-based explosive. It's more forgiving, as we say in the industry, than a lot of other explosives because it will forgive you if you don't handle it quite so. It will still get the job done. It's got a lot of power, a lot of shattering ability, and the cantilevers that we're dealing with are highly reinforced. They're carrying a tremendous load of the 17-story building above it. So with all that reinforcing steel, we needed to be sure that we took the cantilevers out. We've got about 1,570 separate charges in the building, and they're all wired together in what is called parallel series. Once we push the button, all of them go off on a given cue.
Okay. The center will be the first point of motion, the center of the structure, and it will walk this way.
And the point is, it will move when it's ready. We simply give it a bit of a push, and we wait for the structure to respond, and then our timing with delays moves just ahead of what the structure is likely to do. We call it cajoling, forceful persuasion. That's what explosives are all about. They're a catalyst, nothing more.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
I think the fascination that people have with explosives demolition is very similar to the fascination that people have with car crashes at racetracks. People like to flirt with danger. They like to flirt with death. And when they see a building coming down, they're doing just that. They come out, who knows, maybe see us mess up. Well, hopefully they've got a long wait. Explosives are tools. It's a tool that affects everyone's life. People don't realize that the highways that they ride on, the buildings that they live and work in, were partially put there with explosives, the quarrying operations to make the concrete. People don't think about explosives as being an everyday thing.
The Loiseaus have a new use for explosives, decommissioning old Soviet weapons. In this case, Hungarian Scud missile launchers. NATO top brass will be coming to witness the event.
The cabins are going to go off with such ferocity that we need to make sure that it's not going to affect any of the later elements that have to go
Why
off.
are the cabins going to go off so much? I mean, is that because they got, what have they got inside them?
It's a surprise. Wait and see.
Semtex is a Czechoslovakian product, and it is what we in the industry say hot, because you literally can mold it. It is a plastic explosive. You can mold it into any shape that you want. It also is forgiving, and that you can handle it pretty aggressively. It's not that it's difficult to set off, but nothing that I'm doing is going to create a problem, that's for sure. It's going to take a blasting cap, or in this case, a piece of detonating cord to set it off. This detonating cord has a core which burns at 21,000 feet per second. That's appreciably slower than the Semtex. But once the Semtex gets going, nothing is going to stop it.
After 6 centuries of gunpowder, warfare would also be transformed by Nobel's high explosives.
Now, the trouble with gunpowder as a propellant for small arms, you can see it's that smoke. You can see it, you cannot but see it. Imagine you're firing with perhaps 20 colleagues using the same sort of powder. You can be sure that the enemy can most certainly see it. That's very unhealthy. Nobel realized that it would be most advantageous if he could develop a powder which didn't produce that awful smoke.
By mixing nitrocellulose with nitroglycerine, Nobel was able to produce a smokeless powder. He called it ballastite, and it's still used today.
Now, smokeless powder has another very considerable advantage over gunpowder. The first bullet I fired has stopped within this block. The second one has gone through 5 blocks and lodged in the 6th. It has considerably more penetrating power than the one driven by black powder. The reason for which this is possible is that there's simply more energy available in a given mass of powder. This means that much higher pressures can be generated in the breech and, of course, in the barrel of the weapon, and, of course, the terminal effect is much more devastating.
Nobel saw the opportunity for making new weapons that would use his smokeless munitions, and he bought the Swedish gun manufacturer Bofors. However much he loathed the stigma, he was now an arms merchant. Yet he claimed to be a pacifist.
Now he explained this contradiction by saying that he was trying to perfect the ultimate weapon so that in this way he would make war impossible in the future, like the atom bomb. Also, he explained that they were evil arms, but they exerted a very powerful fascination for him. But I believe that such an intellectual man would easily find himself in a quandary as to his attitudes. On one hand, the peace advocate, and on the other hand, the arms merchant.
8 years before he died, Alfred's obituary was mistakenly printed in a French newspaper, which described him as the merchant of death. he was haunted by his posthumous reputation and resolved to leave a legacy that would never be forgotten, the Nobel Peace Prize. Further awards would honor excellence in literature, science, and medicine. This was how he wanted to be remembered. He became obsessed with his own death. He endured terrible headaches from his nitroglycerine. Yet, ironically, later in life, he had to take it as a medicine for his heart disease. Nobel had built an empire founded on an unstable molecule which would kill millions of people. He was a lonely man, tortured by his own success. His conscience would never be clear. Millions of tons of high explosives were fired in the First World War. It was a stark equation, 1 ton of munitions for each human life lost. Over the century, the roll call of high explosives lengthened. TNT, Amatol, Torpex, Semtex, each growing in chemical complexity and power.
I should like to be able to create a substance or a machine with such a horrific capacity for annihilation that wars would become impossible forever.
You are here to participate in an atomic maneuver. Atomic weapons are truly powerful, but they don't mean the end of all life as so many people think. You can live through an atomic attack, and by taking common sense precautions, live to fight another day. Watched from a safe distance, this explosion is one of the most beautiful sights ever seen by man. You're probably saying, so it's beautiful. What makes it so dangerous?
You can have a chemical explosion in which the heat and gas is produced by the energetic decomposition of a material, an explosive. Or you can have a nuclear explosion where the product is really just energy. There is no gas given out as such in the course of a nuclear explosion, and the blast that you get from a nuclear explosion is purely caused by vaporization of the surroundings. And what's happened is there has been direct conversion of mass into energy by Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. And that is where the energy has come from. It's only a fraction of the mass of the original atom that's been lost. But that fraction, when you sum it over all the atoms of plutonium or uranium in a nuclear device, that provides a huge amount of energy.
Bacon and Nobel would have recognized Robert Oppenheimer's symptoms. That irresistible urge to witness a new form of explosive power. This time it was a bigger bang in a bigger backyard, but the dream was the same, a belief that the experiment was so dangerous it would never be attempted again.
Before dawn on July 16, 1945, at the Alamogordo Army Air Base in New Mexico, a small band of...
After the bombs had been dropped on Japan, the scientists returned to restage the first test for the cameras.
2 minutes to go. Stretched out on the sand, tensely expectant, were General Groves, Dr. Bush, and Dr. Conant. In the control shack was Dr. J.R. Oppenheimer, who, assisted by Dr. I. Rabi and others, had directed the making of the bomb itself.
The automatic controls got it now. Rob, this time the stakes are really high. It's going to work all right, Robert, and I'm sure we'll never be sorry for it.
When they first started planning these tests, there was some fairly strong consideration that the detonation of the nuclear weapon would start an atmospheric chain reaction. And obviously that would be the end of the world. But the calculations that they did at that time showed quite conclusively that there was no danger of an atmospheric chain reaction. But it was a worry to begin with.
Minus 10 seconds. Minus 5 seconds. Now!
When it went off in that New Mexico dawn, that first atomic bomb, we thought of Alfred Nobel and his hope, his vain hope, that dynamite would put an end to all wars.
The outtakes from this atomic melodrama are painful to watch. The pathos of the script all too obvious to Oppenheimer.
Go ahead, please. The automatic controls got it. This time, Rob, stakes are kind of high.
Oh, it's going to work all right, Robert. And I'm sure we'll never be sorry for it.
Cut. Go ahead, please. This time, Rob, the stakes are pretty high.
It's going to work all right, Robert. And I'm sure we'll never be sorry for it.
The truth came out 20 years later.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
In the nuclear standoff which followed, there were times when the end of the world did seem close. Yet the Cold War was a war of words, a war which never happened. Now the old weapons are lined up, linked by shock tube and Semtex, awaiting public annihilation.
This is a large megaphone, and it is going to focus
A lot of sound directly at the audience.
right at the audience, right there. Oh, they're going to like this a lot. Yeah.
What do you put inside?
Everything.
Everything we have left over, we're gonna make like a mortar out of it. Project sound and a lot of sparks and stuff like that as the finale.
Why not?
Can it be that simple? Is that the end? The search for the ultimate explosion will not stop. And one day, there'll be another experiment that we'll wish had never been attempted.
The nuclear explosions, as we have done them so far, are the most powerful explosions yet created. That's not the same as saying that they are the ultimate in terms of explosive power. If you think about what's happening in a nuclear explosion, you are only converting a fraction of the mass into energy. And theoretically speaking, at least, you could consider converting rather more of the mass into energy. And in the extreme case, you could consider converting all the mass into energy. And that type of reaction would be, for example, a matter-antimatter reaction, where you get total annihilation and entire conversion to energy. Now, in principle, that would be obviously a far more energetic process.
I mean, are you talking about total annihilation of everything?
No, just total annihilation of the matter and antimatter that comprised your bomb.
Such